Having a good Friday. Got a couple things to talk about today. Before we get started on that, just wanted to open it up for a couple questions. If you guys have any questions you want to talk about first. Okay, no questions. All right, well, maybe as we talk about some things today, there might be some questions. So Russ and I just came back from the Division of Real Estate, where we had to learn about the mandatory class and go over some of the new rules and some of that stuff. So I kind of want to go through a couple things I thought were really important for you guys to keep in mind. One is some of the scams that are going out there right now. I thought that was kind of interesting that we could talk about, and just to be aware of it, because they're getting smarter and they're doing things that are kind of unfortunate for the scammers out there. So the one that most of you probably are aware of is the vacant land one. That one keeps coming up. In fact, I had an agent call me yesterday that has a scenario like that. We had one 2 weeks ago, and they're getting really good at getting information from the seller. We even had one where we asked for an ID, and the ID came in and it was the actual owner's driver's license, but it was not the owner. And when we finally got a hold of the owner, he said, "Oh, that's an old ID that I had." And so they had his ID, which was kind of crazy. But we got this thing. It's called some of the things to just watch out for. Our biggest job as agents is we have to look for the red flags. And when it used to be, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And I think that's a good rule to go by. I also like the gut check, when you just don't feel like you're like, oh, okay, this seems odd, this seems a little bit off, or this just seems like it's just too easy. I would stop for a minute and, just kind of check a few different things. I'm going to give you some ideas of what you can check for when you kind of have an idea for that. Things to watch for, red flags. So real quick, just on this vacant land, what they're doing is they're finding vacant land that's usually paid off. Owner doesn't live really close to it. Sometimes they're close, but they want to find one that the owner's not around very often. Then what they try to do is they get you to list it, try to find a quick cash buyer and close on it, take the money, run. Then the new buyer comes in, finds out it's not their property, and is out that money that they already sent. They did talk about one. This wasn't here in Utah. It was back east, where the owner hadn't been to his property for years, and he showed up to his property and they were building a cabin on the property. And he's like, "Hey, why are you building on my property?" And the buyers, they had no idea. They thought they bought it. That became a pretty big mess, as you could imagine, since the seller didn't really want to get rid of their land, and the buyer threw all this money into a new house. So we can do some things. The more sophisticated they are getting, I don't know if we can get everything, but I'm going to give you a couple things to just look for, so that if you have this happen, you can stop it in its tracks. So a couple things to watch for. Is it vacant or non-owner occupant, such as an investment property, vacation property, or rental property? And it's not that these are bad, because obviously there's a lot of business that has it, that this is part of. It's just, when you have these things, I want you to take an extra step to just verify that this is really there. If it has a different address than the owner's address or tax mailing address. I hope all of you are looking at the PRs and the title reports to making sure that some of this stuff is right. Has no outstanding mortgages or liens, so it's paid off. Is for sale or sold below market value. So if it's significantly lower, like I'm just going to dump the property, They want a quick sell, generally in less than 3 weeks, and may not generate, they may not negotiate any of the fees whatsoever. It might just be, yeah, just send me the documents, we'll pay you whatever. We need to get sold in 3 weeks. The idea is if they can get it sold prior to the owner figuring out that it's for sale, then they have the best chance of making money. Once the owner finds out about it, the owner can stop that sell from happening. Wants cash buyers, is refusing to attend the signing, claims they'll be out of the state or out of country. Some of them are just trying to communicate through email, but we're now getting to the point where they're actually having conversations. The one last week, he would get on the phone anytime they asked. He wasn't in the state, but he would get on, if they said, hey, let's get on a call real quick, let's get on a call, and he'd answer the phone and talk to them. It's difficult to reach by phone or communicates only by text and email, refuses to meet via video call, demands proceeds be wired, refuses or is unable to complete any identification factors that we give them. They want to use their own notary. So they've now got to the point where they've got their own notaries that are helping them sign. And so you guys probably are aware title companies don't check as thorough as we'd like. We're seeing a lot of errors come back from title and they're just not really checking them as much. So just be careful with that. Let's see if there's any other ones. Okay, so couple of things you can do. So when these things happen, obviously getting on the phone and talking to somebody directly is a really good idea. Because sometimes they won't talk to you. Figuring out where they are. If they're not in the state, which most likely they're not going to be in the state, I would pull the tax records and find out where the mailing address is and just see if that mailing address happens to be in Utah. We've had some that the owner just lived in another city right here, and we were able to get a hold of that owner and ask them questions about it. Also, if it's in kind of a neighborhood area, you could always go to that neighborhood and talk to some of the neighbors just to make sure that they're the right person that you should be talking to. Any type of verification, like emails, if they're sending you an email or their phone number, you can run it through Been Verified or look and to see if that number is a valid number for that person. I would never, if they're getting notaries out of state, I would probably look at getting a reputable notary, not using one of theirs. A lot of these things, if you start bringing up the seller or this fraud person, they'll get a little agitated with it. And I find that if it's really truly a seller and you explain to them that there's lots of fraud that's going along with this, they would actually be more grateful that you're bringing this up than frustrated about the process. Because if they're really truly trying to sell the property, I think you're going to have a little easier time getting that information from them and looking at it. And like I said, the one we had in the office, we felt a little uneasy about it, so we asked them to send us an ID. They sent us the ID, and it was the person. And then when we got a hold of the actual seller, the picture was the seller and everything was the seller. So you just have to be careful with that. Let's see, any other thoughts on? Let me just make sure I covered all the things. We just need to make sure we're a little bit more aware of that. I've never seen it in a condo yet, but I've heard they come with condos. It's usually just vacant land. So if you see that come up, just ask a few more questions and get them involved. Any questions?
Jason, I have a question.
Specific one?
I do have a question.
Okay.
Because I get a lot of people with vacant land out here.
Mm-hmm.
And so would you take do the listing agreement and then get all that information? Or would you because you don't really get the title report until you have the listing agreement. So how would that work? How should we do that?
Yeah, I mean, their biggest thing is they want to get the listing paperwork as quick as possible. I would take a little step back, and not necessarily rush to get, if you're seeing some of these constant things that I just went through, if you're saying, and your gut saying something seems off, they want to sell it really quick, send it to me. The one I always find, I like to ask them a couple questions. I'll ask them, I'll ask them where they got my number from, because typically they're not going to be a referral from somebody. They're going to say, oh, I was just searching on Century 21 site and I found you. They're not going to have a specific place for it. So that's one caution that, or a question that I would ask them. But then the other question you can ask them before you get the paperwork done is, if you're familiar with the area and you're familiar with some of the things going on in the area, ask them a couple questions that the title report won't tell them. So like, let's say that there's a big feature that's close to it, there's a river. Ask them a little bit about that, or, you can make it as casual as you want, but just like, hey, what do you think about that shopping center that they have down around the corner? Has that been a good thing for your property or anything? And if they're not answering those correctly, I wouldn't even do the paperwork for it. But that would be kind of my suggestion at first, Jeanette, is don't do the paperwork and do all the work for the person until you find out for sure that they're a real person that you can help.
Okay. Yeah, it's happened to me a couple times up here out west. There's some land that's all landlocked. And I know quite a bit about it, but I have quite a few people from California calling me wanting me to list it. And I'm like, no, we can't list that. But because you can't sell it, right? Because you have to have 160 acres to sell it. But
yeah,
it
and
is happening.
because of your knowledge with that, you could pull them out really quick. But an agent who isn't familiar with that area and they get a phone call from somebody that's wanting to do that, they might not know those that information like you do. So I think that's a great thing for you and for the rest of us. The more knowledge you have about the area and the land itself, the easier you are going to be able to pick these people out. And they're getting so sophisticated that you've got title companies that are involved, notaries involved, that are all just made up, and it becomes really hard for us as agents to distinguish between, okay, is this a real person or not? And if we do our due diligence and there comes back as a problem and we did all of our due diligence, we're going to be fine. If we didn't do our due diligence, then we could have a problem with that. And while I'm on that note, I wanted to bring up something they've mentioned in this meeting that, and I don't do this very often, but this is a caution that they're throwing out to agents, is we need to start verifying emails are linked to the right person. A lot of title companies, a lot of different people will use email often. They'll send you the email, respond to this email, verify that it's really your email, those type of approaches. If we're sending documents through email and we don't have it verified that that's a good email for that person in some way or another, that's becoming more of a problem for us as agents, because we're not doing due diligence to figure out that these are the right people. So the more fraud we see and the more problems and lawsuits that come up, the more you can back up your information and what you're doing and how you're going about your business is going to be really critical for us moving forward. So we'll want to make sure you're doing that kind of stuff. Any other questions on that one? Okay, one that we're seeing a lot more lately, and I don't necessarily put this under, there is some scams that are going with this, but more of a problem that we're seeing. So you take a listing, and in that listing, you get an offer from a wholesaler. The wholesaler has got a whole addendum that says, the seller's going to let me do this and this and this and this, and they're going to show the property and all of those things. It's not necessarily a scam, but you have to be really careful on the listing agent side, because what happens is you lock your client into a a contract with a wholesaler who's now going out and trying to find their own buyer to take over that contract so that they can make a quick finder's fee for doing that wholesale. And these finder fees I've seen, you know, anywhere from $15,000 up to $30,000 on different properties that they're trying to make. So it's basically, I'm going to take, you have a listing and I want to market your listing and still get paid on it. So I'm going to write you an offer. Then I'm going to take that offer and I'm going to promote those terms and see if I can get a buyer for it. Well, what's happening is once it hits their due diligence deadline, if they don't have a buyer for it, they're going to cancel the contract on you. So you have to be really careful that when you are a listing agent and you're seeing those offers come in, and I've seen them come in, 3 of them in the last week in our own office, that are saying, this is what we're trying to do. So just be careful that we're representing our sellers in a way that helps them to get the best deal possible for them, and, you know, not necessarily throw in every single wholesaler that comes out there. I look at the wholesalers just as a normal investor. We've all worked with investors that the idea of investing is awesome. I want to be an investor. I want to make lots of money. I'm going to do it. And then they never buy a property. They want you to write 100 offers. And if, you know, and your offers are really low, and if they get that, then they're going to be happy. And reality is they probably never buy. So there's those two kinds of investors. The one that's buying all the time and you want to get in contact with and you want them to be your client. And there's the ones that are what I would call the wannabes, that are, I want to be that, I want to be this, but I'm never going to pull the trigger. And they just waste your time. Well, that's the same situation with wholesalers. They're going to say, I've got this network, I've got these people that want to buy. Okay, great. But there's wholesalers that have people, and then there's wannabe wholesalers that just want to take your listing, market it, see if they can make some money off of your listing. So it's a strategy that I'm seeing a lot of agents trying to move towards. It's not necessarily a scam as far as they can legally do that, but that might not be in the best interest of your client, the seller. The one caution that I would have is some wholesalers sell the contract to another wholesaler, and then that wholesaler is selling to another one. So there's 2 people making finder fees and then the end result. I would suggest not doing that with your sellers. One transfer of the contract is probably the safest way to do it. If you start getting to 2, then my question to you would be, if there's that much money in there for 2 wholesalers to make money, then there should be no reason for you as an agent to not be able to sell it to somebody who can buy it. And I'm not saying there's not unique situations out there. It's just one of those things that I'd be really careful with as you're taking listings now, because I'm seeing that come more and more. And I just personally, I think it's a strategy that agents are using to take your listing and market it and see if they can get paid from it, even though it's been already listed. So any questions on the wholesaling side?
I would just say on the wholesaling side, and maybe you address this, but as agents, we need to see when it says they can assign this listing. I've seen more and more when I have wholesalers writing an offer and they say it can be assigned. If they can't find a wholesaler by their due diligence, they just cancel on you. So be very wary of that.
Yeah, and that's when they're usually canceling. I mean, so
Yep.
that's why locking up your seller as a listing agent, it's not in your best interest to put a whole bunch of those together and have them selling it. Just get out and market the property and get it sold. So yes, they're canceling on due diligence. They're getting their earnest money back. And your seller is kind of out. They think they're getting their home sold, but in reality, the wholesaler couldn't sell the contract that they got on it. So ultimately it falls apart. So yeah, definitely something to be aware of with the way they do it. The other thing is I've seen weird things put in their contract as far as you know, the buyer can pretty much do whatever they want to the property. They can show it, they can bring contractors in, they can do whatever they want. If the seller's agreeing to that, it really isn't doing them the best service. So from the compliance side of it, just so you guys don't get yourself in trouble, if your client's agreeing to stuff that's not in their best interest, you've got to have something in place that says, we had a conversation that said, you're going against what I actually am telling you to do. Because if I just let them go with it and to the very end, and then there's a problem, we get into a lawsuit, an attorney's going to turn to you as the professional and they're going to say, why would you even put them in a contract like that? That's not protecting your clients. You're breaking your fiduciary duties. So even though they're saying yes to it, because I've had lots of agents come to me and say, oh, my client's fine with it. They said they'll sign it. If it's not in their best interest, you need to have something in writing from your client that's saying, I'm going to do this, even though my agent is saying it's probably not in my best interest. That way, if they come back and they say, you did this, you can say, I didn't advise them to do this, and I'm looking through it. Now, if they're doing illegal things, that's when I would say it's time to cancel the contract and get out of it yourself. But non-legal things, just not smart things, which I see happen all the time. In fact, 3 weeks ago, I had an offer that came in, and it was so bad for the seller that and the agent in our office said, no, the seller's fine with this. That's fine. They just want to get rid of the house. They're fine. And I looked at the offer and I said, if the sellers, I mean, basically what they were doing is they were taking a seller finance deal that they paid no interest on and were paying like 1% over the life of the loan. And it just made no sense for the seller whatsoever. And so I looked at it and I told him, I said, well, if the seller's willing to do that, then you should just give it to me, because that seems like a ridiculous offer. And eventually it was a ridiculous offer and the seller didn't do it. But just be careful that sometimes your clients are going to get emotional. Your job is to, I say, there's going to be a storm in your real estate. You need to be the calm in the storm. You need to be the one that calms everything down, to look at things objectively and say, this is not in your best interest, or this seems like a good thing for you. I want you to evaluate it. So just be really cautious with sellers that are just saying, I just want to be done. And there might be legitimate reasons for them that's not money related, that says, I need to get this house done and I'll just sell it for as low as I need to. And then that goes from there. Okay.
Jason,
Yep.
I have a quick question. Maybe this is for another time. You're talking a lot about the listing agent, but as a buyer's agent, I'm getting a lot of investors inquiring from me as well, looking for distressed properties. And I'm just curious as to how we can protect ourselves on the buying side, representing them, to cover our bases as well. And how do we know how legit they are?
So I guess I think there's two sides to this. So are we talking about covering your bases if they're not a real buyer and they're trying to take advantage of somebody, or are you just saying if they're going for a seller and they're asking for a ridiculously low price?
Maybe just asking for a low price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think that you have to represent them any differently. Our duty is to our buyer. If you can get them a deal that, like, even though it might not be the best deal on the seller's part, us as agents are not responsible for what the seller's doing if I'm representing my buyer. Obviously, if you're doing something illegal and you're, not disclosing certain things, I wouldn't participate in that. But as far as if your client wants to write a low offer and you have a buyer broker agreement, our fiduciary duty is that we will do its obedience. We're going to do what our client asks us as long as it's not illegal. So if, give you a weird example, let's say the property is worth 500,000 and the buyer says, well, offer them 100,000 and see what happens. And you offer them 100,000. If they accept it or they don't accept it, that's on the selling side. And I'd be more cautious if I was the selling agent allowing that to happen than on the buying side.
Okay, the other quick question was, when I'm approaching a listing agent, What I have done on an offer with an investor is I've just said I've turned them as a buyer because I'm afraid if I label them as investor, I mean, they'll find out from the offer for sure because they disclose their investor. Sometimes people just don't even consider, right? If, oh, it's an investor, I'm not even going to consider that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, in all senses purposes, they're just a buyer. So we can label them as investors or buyers or however you want to label them, but all investors are buyers and all buyers are investors. We buy properties, and if you're a homeowner that's going to stay in it, we're investing in that property however long we're living in it. So I don't see any issues with not saying that they're an investor and they're just a buyer. You're putting that on your contract as they are a buyer. There's nothing in our contract that says I am an investor.
Well, yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, that's basically what I've done. So I just don't want any prejudices. I just wanted to, hey, I have a buyer. You know what I mean?
Yep. Well, as far as I know, investors are not a protected class, nor will they ever be a protected class. I think we're all right with that. The last thing I wanted to cover is, and we see this come through every once in a while. If a builder comes to you and wants you to list the properties that they're going to sell. Everyone wants to list properties for a builder, say, or a developer. I'm going to develop this whole subdivision. I want you to be the listing agent. Super exciting. What we want to make sure of is that builder has the ability to sell those properties. If they're not the owner, which is what's happening, is the seller owns the land, then the builder is building on the land, and then the builder wants to sell it, and then at the end they're going to buy the land from the seller. Well, the problem that we're seeing is the builder signing all of the exclusive right to sells. They're the ones that are doing all this employing you, but they have to have some either permission or some way from the actual owner to be able to employ you to sell the property. So if you're getting a builder or a developer that you're working with, before you actually list it and put it on the MLS, follow the paper trail to the owner. Figure out how the owner is getting connected with the builder, and the builder, or it goes the owner, developer, builder, end person. So just find out which one it is, because we're seeing where the seller has no contract, the developer has a contract with the builder, and the builder is listing it with the agent. And then when we get the paperwork, we're saying, well, nobody's connected to the actual owner of the property. So those are just some things that I want you to keep in mind. Today was more of just about, being more aware of your transactions. The courts are going to look at us as the professional. We have a professional license. That means that when you are in front of a judge, they're going to look at you as the professional who should know, which means if you don't know, you should know. You should figure it out. You figure out who's involved before you get too deep into it. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys today. Any questions on that, or any questions of any other sort before we jump off?
I would just say everything you said is spot on. We need to future pace our clients. And I have done the same thing, Jason. When my client says, hey, I just want to dump this for $220, I'm like, well, I'm your first buyer. And we need to be on our seller's side and realize we're the professionals. We can't let them get sucked in to these people that want to take advantage of them. And that's why they trust us as the valued professional. So we just need to do our job. And I've said that just recently to a client. Like, they just want to dump it. I'm like, okay, let me go get a loan. I'm going to buy it. And then it makes them realize we're on their side, and don't let these people that want to come in and take advantage of our clients do that. It just really irks me when I see that happening. So let's be the professional.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Okay, any other questions or thoughts? Okay, have a great weekend, and if you have any questions, reach out anytime.
Thank you, Jason.
Yep, you're welcome.
Thank you.
So I just put something on the chat that as soon as I send something like this, they stop bugging me when they're a scammer. And it's basically going through, if you'll leave that on for just a minute. And I thank them for contacting me and all this, but I never get a response because they're always a scammer.
Yeah.
So anyway,
As soon as the scammer gets figured out that they are caught, you know, that you're on to them, that's usually when they stop calling you, they stop interacting with you, they're going to go to the next agent. So,
well, and they have to, I'm telling them they have to meet me in the office or be on Zoom with their camera on, give me their lender's information, their state ID, their, you know, whatever. And they don't return, and they just don't bug me. So it's
Yeah.
just paste and bye, see ya.
Absolutely. I think that's a great method. Plus it protects you. If there ever was a problem, you can come back and say, these are the steps that I took. And they're getting more sophisticated as scammers. It used to just be a pretty known way of doing it. Now it's you have to really figure out what's going on. So thank you for that.
Well, good job today. Thank you.
Okay, have a great weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.